Hi, I'm Mandelyn Royal, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of the Poultry Keepers podcast. Joining me in the studio are John Gunterman and Rip Stalvey, the rest of our podcast team, and we're looking forward to visiting with you and talking poultry from feathers to function.
And when I say weigh your birds, the standard dictates the weight for every breed, and try to keep within those weight parameters, within 20%, one way or the other, you'll be fine. But once you start going over that 20% too much in weight, got a problem going on.
Sure. And that
tells you need to regulate the amount of feed your birds are consuming. And the only way that I know of to do that effectively is that you limit the amount of feed you're feeding your birds. Average bird, whatever the average bird is, I'm not real sure at this point anymore. But usually you can allow 4 ounces of feed per bird per day. And that, here again, that depends on the quality of your feed. I feed a real high quality feed, and I started mine out at 4 ounces per day once they matured. And it didn't take long before I realized, hey, this is too much feed. I got to cut them back. And I'm down to the point now to where I'm feeding a little bit less than 3 ounces of feed per bird per day.
About where I am now. I judge it by when they go to bed. I look at how much is left. I've put enough out so it's gone by the middle of the day. And then I put some out for the end of the day just to fill their crops before they go to roost for the night. I think it's important, though, that we should mention this is all after grow out. This is post 16, 18, 20 weeks. For that first minimum 16 weeks, I want to keep food and grit in front of them and water at all times.
Yes.
As much as they can possibly get down whenever they want it.
Yeah, I generally pre-feed all the way up until I get an egg. And then once I start seeing the egg, then I've come around to the idea of limiting their feed. I used to free choice feed everything all the time until I started running into that pickle when those girls get to be 1 year old. They're not laying when they should be. I start picking them up. They're obese. They're fat. They're not productive. And that's where I did start to see that value in monitor their condition and keep them a little on the lean side, not bony or anything, but don't let them get fat.
And keep them interested in foraging. They're like, oh, we're out over here in the feeder. Let's go look for bugs and worms.
1 ounce of feed doesn't sound like very much when you talk about savings. But when you figure you've got a bunch of mouths to feed, like 10 or plus feet, and Mandy, I don't know how many birds you've got, but that 1 ounce would be a substantial savings for you.
Yeah, it adds up pretty quick. And right now, when I'm in peak grow out season, I have birds of all ages. I might be blowing through 1,200 pounds a month.
Yeah.
That's a lot of ounces.
It's a lot of ounces. You're exactly right. That's a lot of dollars.
I'm pretty excited to see the drop in consumption just by changing the quality of our feed, because the cost wasn't that much more, because I was spending anywhere from $19.99 a bag up to $23 a bag. And that was for mid-tier crumble feed. And then when I switched over to Jeff's formulas and I started getting it as a milled feed, it took the cost up to, like $26.50 a bag. But I'm saving more money by spending a little more initially. It shows in the drop of consumption. And then the birds are better on it. They have a different contentment to them. They don't look at me like they're still starving after eating half a feeder.
And you probably get
really neat.
More eggs, better quality eggs.
Yeah,
eggs that
better
hatch
quality
easier,
eggs,
stronger
sure.
chicks, better fertility. So it's
And
not just,
it costs much more, a couple bucks.
I did some figuring on that. You're talking about how much it costs. And I compared my high-end feed, which I'm paying the same thing you are, about $26.50 a bag, 50-pound bag, to one over here at our local Big Bucks Farm Supply. That was, I got the numbers right here. Hang on. $23 a bag. Okay. Initially, my feed cost me $3 more roughly a bag, a little over $3 more a bag than the big box brand name. But when you figure out that your birds on this high quality feed are going to eat easily 20 to 25% less feed than when you're feeding those lesser quality feeds. They feel like they have to eat more because they're not getting the nutrition they need.
Mhm.
But when you use a feed that is nutritionally dense, it's well formulated, it's balanced for their needs, it has the proper levels of amino acids, the proper levels of vitamins and minerals, they don't need to eat as much feed.
And it's fresh and delicious and nutritious.
But when I factored all of that in, okay, you know how much more it costs me to feed a bird than on the feed I'm using versus what I could get in the store?
Oh, the other way.
Cost me about a penny more per day to use a high quality feed.
But then with the improved hatch rates and the improved egg quality, that turns into additional gain.
Additional revenue,
So,
yeah.
Sure.
Better egg
even if
production.
you get 10% bump in your hatch rate by feeding better, and you're getting 10% more chicks, that makes that little penny more totally worth it.
And people they have hens to lay eggs. Higher quality feed is going to give you not only more nutritious eggs, it's going to give you more eggs in the long run because you're going to see your production bump up. If you go from a lower quality feed to a high quality feed, the notice and the changes will be pretty dramatic.
Especially on grow out, because naturally the body cavity is going to develop better and stronger and more appropriate to the laying. The bird's just going to be bigger and healthier and better developed.
Yeah. And Mandy, you've been doing them, although I think you've about wrapped up your feed study right now. Basically, Mandy can tell you, she can reaffirm what we're just talking about, that you get more growth, more body development.
I'm so excited. I'm doing a second trial. I just baked in the incubator yesterday.
Just knew it.
Oh, good for you. I knew that was coming.
I only said 106 eggs, though.
Only. Hey, you know what? That's a smaller number. You should try my little experiment about weighing all the chicks every day for the first 3 weeks.
Oh, that sounds tedious.
It is, but there is so much valuable information in
So a
that
friend of
initial
mine was
capture.
weighing her chicks daily, and it was really neat to see just how big of gains they can actually do in a single day.
Yes.
Yeah.
When they're eating good and they're getting everything they need, daily gain, they're like little balloons filling up.
It's almost scary how fast they can grow.
Yeah. And then if you look at them across their cohort, by the end of 3 weeks, you can tell who your rock stars are and who can be sold off as still a very good started chick.
More suitable to just do breakfast eggs.
Yeah.
Mandy, have you gotten to the point yet where you've totaled any numbers? For example, I know you try to process your birds at about 16 weeks, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and I still need to weigh all of our carcasses and get everything in front of me in the spreadsheet. I still have my scribbles.
I understand that. I was just wondering, are you seeing better fleshing at 16 weeks on this new feed, or are they attaining better flesh in less than 16 weeks?
There was a lot of variation because the genetics were so diverse. There was like 4 different genetic families involved total. And the birds that normally grow well grew better. And the others, I didn't have experience with them before, so I don't know what they were doing before. So that's why I'm immediately jumping right back into a trial using just one family of genetics. And then I can compare the new data with the old data and then also see how this batch does from birds that I'm a lot more familiar with.
That will be the telling.
That
will be the telling study, I think.
Yeah.
Because then you're comparing apples to apples, not apples and oranges.
But that first trial did let me work all the kinks out and figure out how to do it better.
We always learn, and we always realize that no matter how much we know, we didn't know as much as we thought we knew. That's my profound statement for the day. We talked about high quality feed and low quality feed, bargain feeds. And if you're unsure that if you're looking at look at the feed tag. You can learn a lot from the feed tag. And don't just stop at the protein and the fat and the fiber. Read the entire tag.
Especially those ingredients.
Ooh, yeah. Just as important, sometimes I think it's probably a little bit more important than the total amount of protein is the levels of the amino acids lysine and methionine. If there's not enough lysine and methionine, you're not going to get good growth on your birds. Just absolutely no way.
You're not going to get healthy chicks out of the egg.
No. And it affects not only the body growth, but it affects the feathers. There's your protein, let's face it. What are proteins? Amino acids. It's going to impact not only the bodies and the feathers, but like John was saying, the health. And you're going to get more hatchability, more vigorous chicks that hatch. It's just a snowball effect. It doesn't just start here and stop. It just keeps, it's one of those things that just keeps going and going and going in so many areas.
It was amazing to me. When I've said this before, it's when I stopped trying to save money on feed is when I actually started saving money on feed.
I'm glad you brought that up.
I started sprinkling this magic Furtrell breeder supplement powder over my all flock starter crumbles. And all of a sudden I'm going, wow, these chicks are very different than the chick 2 weeks ago in the previous batch. There's something going on here. And then the grit, we have not brought up grit yet, except once.
I got it in the notes
important. Here. Yeah, I know. But there's no way. You're putting all this beautiful nutrition down into your chickens. And without grit in the gizzard and proper gizzard function to grind and masticate and extract all this goodness, it's just going out the back end. We say 10% more or savings just from adding grit. That would just otherwise be going right out the back end of your chicken.
I saw a report fairly recently that they did on broilers where they didn't get 10%. They had a 15% improvement in feed efficiency just from feeding grit. Grit's cheap and it works wonders.
Yep. Even they say sometimes on the internet that if you feed a crumble, you don't need grit. And that's not true.
Malarkey.
No.
Not true at all.
We need to do a chicken myth busting.
Ooh,
there's a few things I just want to smash apart.
Next time.
That would be fun.
Oyster shell can be substituted for grit.
No.
Not even.
Not true.
And I had someone contact me the other day that was wanting to know about limestone grit.
Oh.
No, that's just about as bad as oyster shells.
Almost as bad, just a notch in between.
And the reason we say they're not good, those are fairly soft materials. What we're talking about is granite.
Right.
Good old, hard as my head granite. And you may not know
Mine from right here in Barry, Vermont.
Beautiful. The color of the grit can make a difference too. I learned this from Jeff, that most chickens don't like to eat red grit, not cherry stone grit. They much prefer the white grit.
Yeah.
And somebody came on and verified, said, my birds will not eat cherry grit. They'll go without it. But chickens are funny, and the more I learn about them, the funnier it gets sometimes. And it's the little things that can improve the efficiency, that can improve the overall health and welfare of our birds and the production long term. We're not just telling
incremental
you folks,
improvements.
We're telling you folks this kind of stuff to save you time, to save you money, to save you effort, because trust me, I have made every single error and every single mistake we're going over today.
At least twice.
Just usually multiple times. But I thought that was impressive where they were saving or getting 15% better feed efficiency, feeding the birds grit. And don't wait until they are mature. Heck no. You want to start immediately. Day-old chicks, give them grit. Sprinkle it on top of their feed.
I am mixing chick grit into my starter feed, which literally putting inside my hatcher. So the chicks are coming out of the eggs and they're falling into a pile of food and grit. And there's a water.
Top dressing with chick grit the first day. I just sprinkle it right on top. It's the first thing they see.
I read a study where it said that if it was mixed into the feed, it was like a certain percentage more efficient. And since I'm mixing my own feed anyways, I'm buying my grains whole, weighing them out, cracking them or grinding them, and doing the whole thing. I can mix it in at the same time. And it's real easy for me to say, oh, I need 10% grit, and this is a 100-pound batch, so 10 pounds of grit gets thrown in.
And
It
grit
starts.
is not expensive.
It's not. And what it brings, easiest way to save money on your food bill and make healthier chickens.
Yes.
And if you're not doing it, I'm going to quote Jeff, you're just being cruel to your birds. They really are. Do they have a gizzard for a reason?
We got sidetracked, but we were talking about what's in your feed. All right. If you see things like plant byproducts, if you see anything that says byproducts, that means it's previously been used for something else.
Yeah.
And this is the leftovers.
Yeah.
You'll see distiller grain byproducts. That's already gone through the cooking, fermentation process and had nutrients removed. Those are fillers. They are fairly inexpensive to use in feed. And some feed absolutely has to have fillers in it.
If you're buying pellets,
and if you're getting crumbles.
It's a binder. It has to.
Yeah, you can't make a pellet without that binder.
And here's another irony. You mentioned crumble. First they make a pellet, then they bust it up to make crumble. Just leave it alone.
And I can remember when crumble was about all you could get, and I knew the company made a pellet. I priced it. It was $3 more for a bag of pellet. I never did figure that one out because that's got to have pellets to make the crumble. But okay, whatever.
Now that I've been feeding just this coarse mash, my birds just are loving life. I'm loving life. I'm able to actually go around to my local farmers because I live in a very rural agrarian area and buy corn and wheat and barley and oats when it's seasonally available from my neighbors and store it. Right now, they're all in 55-gallon steel cans. I did run short on corn, so I had to run up to E.M. Brown & Sons and buy another 200 pounds, but I'm still great on all the other ingredients.
That's good.
A friend of mine is trying to get me to bring home his silo. It's an actual stand-up.
Oh, there you go.
Must hold 1,000 pounds at least. It's a pretty good size. I was like, so what? I can get my corn whole and store it indefinitely.
Yes, I was looking at it.
Silo for each ingredient.
As long as they're whole, you can use the IBC totes, and as long as they're kept dry. As soon as it's ground, do not store your feed in an IBC tote.
Nope.
It's going to mold instantly. Like, worst idea ever. Keep your grain whole. You get a screw auger feed system. Great storage solution.
What can you do if you can't find a good quality feed? And that happens very regularly.
That's where the supplements come into play, I think.
Or exactly. You can make your own, you can have it custom made, or you can use a feed supplement. And there's two good ones on the market right now that I highly recommend. One is the Fur Trail Breeder and Showbird supplement, and the other one is Kerry Blackman's Show Pro supplement. Both were formulated and developed by Jeff Maddox. They're good stuff.
For the specific purpose.
Yes. The Show Pro, if you're into showing birds, it has some added cysteine, the amino acid cysteine, for improving your feather quality a little bit, if you have that concern with your birds. Plus, it has a couple of other ingredients that are not in the Fur Trail product. You think, oh, that's expensive. Yeah. But it's one of those things, the Fur Trail supplement, $50 for 10 pounds. But you use such a small amount. For an average large fowl, you're only feeding them a teaspoon of that stuff a day.
Yeah, you better keep that in the freezer along with your coffee because you're probably not going to use it all before it ages out. And it keeps perfectly in the freezer.
It will greatly improve your bird.
Mm-hmm.
I know the first time I tried it, I was feeding nutrient feed, and I was basically clueless about Fur Trail supplement and all that kind of stuff. And Jeff Maddox talked me into trying it.
That's how he got me.
Well, I noticed a change in my bird in about 3 days.
Yeah.
And then it just kept them get better and better and better. It's one of those investments that can save you money and give you better, stronger, healthier birds in the long run.
We talked about the feed and the supplements and their nutrition to help them be as productive as possible. But there's still another way where things get lost, which is if they're wasting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot in the feeder type, which you ran into on your grow out in this feed trial.
Yeah, that was something I didn't anticipate.
And then there's so many nuances to providing the feed to the bird. Why don't you explain what happened during the feed trial?
So I had just the basic round gravity style feeders, and I have them in multiple sizes from 1 pound all the way up to 11 pounds. And I've historically only ever been feeding a crumble, and there was no issue with the flow of that feed getting to that bottom trough. But when I started with the new chick starter that was milled and really fine for the chicks, it didn't flow down to the bottom trough. It just hung in the gravity part and didn't flow. And it took me a couple of days where I would lift it up and shake it. And I was thinking, well, that's weird. But then I saw it didn't flow. It didn't move through. So it's a whole other type of feeder that I need to invest in order to feed that style of feed. And I'm going to have to do the trough styles where it can spread out, which actually is better for the birds, and it gives everybody more shoulder room to access that feeder. And that then reduces your competition, which then gives you a more even and consistent flock result as it turns out.
And you've seen from your friends' weigh data that even now hours without feed can make a difference in those.
Yeah,
results.
it didn't seem like it was that much, but when I compared notes with another friend of mine using our genetics, he was averaging 30 grams heavier. For a little week-old chick, that's a lot.
That's everything.
Yeah, where I saw 65 grams, he saw 100, 110 grams.
When you first told me that, Mandelyn, I saw, and I got to thinking, I don't remember seeing a tube type feeder until early to mid 60s. And that's just about the time that you started seeing a lot of crumbles to market. Up until that time, everything was mash feed and everything was fed in a trough.
Makes sense now.
And I could be off on those dates a little bit. I'm getting to be an old geezer and I don't often remember things as I should. And I remember going up to a gentleman up here that lived north of me, Ed Little, and he had, I don't know, 500-600 Rhode Island red commercial birds. And his feeders, they were homemade. Nothing wrong with a homemade feeder. They worked great. He made them out of 1x8, and they were just 8 foot long, just 3 boards, open on the top where the birds could access the feed. He would not fill them over halfway to help lessen the feed waste, because if you've ever watched your birds, they are great at sorting through and billing through feed to expose those choice bits. And a choice bit to a bird is the larger pieces first and things that look yellow. Corn, wheat.
They're little piggies.
And they don't have hands. They can't sort through them and they can't get into the feeder and scratch. So what do they use? They use their beak. And they're trying to peck and then they jerk their head back to expose a little bit of feed. So if you can increase the height of your feeder, you can help reduce that. I know a lot of folks are using a piece of PVC pipe, 6-inch PVC pipe.
My birds threw 50 pounds on the floor so fast using those PVC feeder designs.
Flip their head back and forth.
I learned the trick to dealing with that. You cut yours in half when you made the feeder?
No, I did the tube going up and then an elbow coming out. We had about a 45-degree angle upward. That was supposed to prevent that from happening.
Doesn't.
Put grates down, so they have to go through the grate to get to the food.
That can work, and you can buy plastic feed grates, or you can make it out of some 1/2 by 1 inch wire. But I was talking to a friend of mine out in Oregon, and we were talking about PVC pipe feeders. And he said when he first made some, he hated them because he took a 6-inch piece of pipe and cut it halfway down, made 2 feeders out of it. Mm-hmm. Well, you got this kind of wideish trough that's really not very deep, but it has these straight sides on it. He said finally it dawned on him to only cut about the top third off of that piece of pipe. So he had curved side that as the birds would flick the feed back towards them, it would fall back in. It wouldn't go out
Oh,
of the feeder itself. And then he also rigged a no roost pole that goes across there where some folks complain, well, my birds get into feeders, the trough style feeders. Just put a round dial, works good, piece of PVC pipe, but have it where it will spin free and hang it over the feed. Give them just enough room to get their head in there, but not enough room that they can get in there and make a mess with it.
And that can be as simple as running a piece of sturdy cable with the pipe over that.
Yeah.
That makes it real loosey-goosey. As soon as they try to jump on it, they slide right off.
I was talking about Mr. Little earlier. I remember his feeders. He had taken strips of wooden lath, like they used to put plaster up with, and he had cut squares. I don't know. They seemed like they were about 3 inches square for each end, and then he'd run strips of lath back and forth. He had one on the side, one on the top, one on the bottom, both sides, top and bottom. And he had fixed it, had just driven a nail in there and then drilled a hole in the end of extended his feeder board up, drilled a hole in that to where it would just sit there and spin just as free as it could be, just like it was on berry. The birds could get on it. It didn't throw them right off, but it would eventually, it would spin them around and keep them off.
Now, one of my favorite ways to save on feed is always keeping my eye out for the unproductive birds, the ones who just never grow up to be the best.
No slackers.
The slackers, the ones who fill in well. They were always puny. They maybe only put out 2 or 3 eggs a week. Just the least productive birds are the ones
they need to go.
Freezer first.
They need to go. They're costing you money. Big dollars. And I know you can get attached to birds and all that, but it's something you really have to do. And with our economy the way it is here, that if those less productive birds are not removed from the flock, your prices are going to go out of sight.
I'm not keeping any bird past 32 weeks of age unless she's laying 5 eggs a week.
At least 5. I like to see 6.
6 would be great. I had one last year that laid 7. Pause.
For how long?
Overachiever.
Yeah, non-stop. I set
that's
every
the
egg.
one you definitely want to hatch from.
I set every egg she laid for 2 months. See,
Rate
that
of
brings
laying
up
the
another
bottom.
point, though. It's so hard to overhatch and get yourself into a bind.
Oh, it's not hard to overhatch. It's hard to control yourself and keep yourself from overhatching.
It is. It is. There's hatchaholic support groups. I'm not joking about this.
I'm guilty of it. I can't point fingers and say, hey. I can't do that because I'd have to point right back at me.
Yeah, so budget for the number of birds you can afford to raise. Try to hold yourself to that budget and promote a marital harmony and fiscal responsibility and all those important things.
Another thing that comes to mind, let's face it, we all like to spoil our bird. We all like to give them treats. It's not the best thing for your birds. It's not healthy choice. It costs you money. Okay. And if you were to start reducing their treats, they're going to look at you with that sorry, pitiful look on their face and try to lay the guilt trip on you, but don't knuckle under. Limit treats to no more than 10% of the bird's daily intake of food. Okay. If you're feeding 4 ounces of feed per bird, and don't just say, I'll just throw them a handful of corn. How much does that handful of corn weigh? Or I'll throw out a handful of mealworms. How much do those mealworms weigh? Deduct that from the amount of feed.
But also look what it's doing to the nutritional profile for the day for the bird.
Screwing it all up.
It's throwing it out of balance. And now I've convinced my birds that if I take a handful of their regular feed and I wet it and I mash it up into a little ball and I throw it, that's the best treat in the whole wide world.
They think it's something spectacular.
Oof.
Time you turn that bag around and you read it, it says feed as a sole ration.
Yes.
And then when you look at that analysis and it says this is your protein, this is your fat, this is your lysine, this is your, all of those little levels is based on the assumption that they're not eating anything else.
Right.
Everything you add takes away from that analysis.
Exactly.
Of what they're actually taking in.
I've never seen
a giant of iceberg lettuce to keep them entertained. They're getting zero nutrition from it.
unless you're buying a nutritional supplement from a supplement maker, you're not supplementing their diet by feeding them kitchen scraps or anything else.
Some
Yeah.
people I've seen where they do warm oatmeal as a treat in the wintertime, but when you look at the nutritional profile of oatmeal,
Backwards.
there's really not a whole lot in there.
If you want
Now,
to feed them
cream of
something,
corn.
if you want to feed them something warm, just take some of your feed and add hot water to it.
That's it. Yeah, and keep the
They'll hug
nutritional
your neck if
profile
you do
working.
that. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Hey, do either one of you guys have anything else you want to cover? I think we've pretty well gone through our line here.
Difference that a little free range can make if you can keep them safe when they
Free
go out
range
and
is
find the
huge.
live bugs. Because what some people don't realize, when you get that little bag of dried out mealworms, it doesn't have the amino proteins in there for nutrition. They're a dried out shell of a husk with incomplete proteins. So the nutrition isn't there. But you give them a live bug, now you're talking.
That's right.
And
Plus, if
from
you
the
order, go ahead, John.
culinary perspective, this access to pasture is where all your flavor and all the wonderful things that are supposed to be beautiful about a heritage chicken are going to start expressing themselves. If they're just on a bag, boring feed their entire life, they're not going to taste that amazing as a chicken. They're going to taste.
And
but
even
if-
the color of the yolk and the egg, when they start getting those dark leafy greens, you start seeing that real dark orange yolk.
oh, the carotenoid pigments are amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I saw-
the yolks stand so tall in the pan when you're cooking them. I almost hate to break the yolk, but I
Yeah.
like to have it broken in my sandwich a little bit.
I saw a picture of an egg yolk the other day that was a light cream color at best.
I've seen white yolk before.
Oh, yeah.
Those are so unappetizing to me. I'm sorry. I like a good, strong yellow, light orange yolk.
That's really, we talk about that taste of place, terroir, in the kitchen, in the culinary world. And that's where that's coming from, is access to nature, the sun, the rain, the bugs, the worms, the dirt, the soil. That's how a chicken should chicken. That's
Part of being a chicken. That's exactly right.
And the more feed they go find on their own out of that nutrient dense environment, the less of the bag stuff they're going to have.
Right. John and Mandy, I appreciate you so much today. Y'all did a really good job. I had fun. I hope you two did, and I hope our listeners had a good time and learned something from us today.
I just hope we save some people time, because it can
Yes.
take a lot of time to learn. You didn't save any money at all. Actually, you spent a lot more. You spun your wheels for a little while. You scrambled for a little while. Let us
Yeah.
save you that time and just do it the best way you can afford. And it'll help your birds a lot.
it will.
And you will be a much happier camper because of it.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Yeah. And
Well,
we've
we-
stayed away from, never mind. Go ahead.
I was
I
just
say
going
we
to say,
stayed away from my trigger point. I wasted 2 semesters on fermented feed. Let's
That's-
save that for its whole other rant.
that's another can of worms.
Take us home.
All right. Folks, we are so glad you joined us today for this podcast show from the Poultry Keepers podcast. We're happy to have you with us. And it's our listeners that keep us going and keep us wanting to do this because we hear from them on a regular basis how much they appreciate it. And recently we just reached 25,000 downloads. And remember the first
We've
episode we
crossed the
did, I
year
was
mark.
ecstatic when we got 25 downloads.
We've crossed the year mark now.
Yep.
Very strongly. It's almost, I think Mandy joined us not long after we started. I remember visiting her place on 4th of July last year.
I just started to say,
Wasn't
I
it?
want to say it was in late July when she came on.
Yeah. I was bringing
Yeah, I
her
think I've only
some
got through
birds.
4 episodes or so.
Yeah, it wasn't much. We're going to wrap it up. I'm going to let my partners here get on with their daily routines, and I'll get on with mine.
This brings us to the close of another Poultry Keepers podcast, and we're very happy you chose to join us. Until next time, we'd appreciate it if you would drop us a note, letting us know your thoughts about our podcast. Please share our podcast with all of your friends that keep poultry, and we hope you'll join us again when we'll be talking poultry from feathers to function.